with the 50th anniversary of the assassination of President Kennedy, there's also been a lot of discussion about the myth of Camelot, how the legendary tales of King Arthur became a metaphor for the Kennedy era. Now, new Repertory Theatre is reacquainting us with the classic musical Camelot. WGBH arts editor Jared Bowen was at the opening last night.
The 1960 Lerner & Loewe musical Camelot delivers us to King Arthur's utopian landscape. As he and his queen Guinevere remind us, there is no more congenial spot for happily ever aftering. It's a place where Arthur wants Lancelot and his fellow knights of the Round Table to use their chivalry, to each be a knight for right. The long-running show and its best-selling LP were still very much in the public's consciousness when President John F. Kennedy was assassinated 50 years ago. Shortly after his death, Jacqueline Kennedy remarked, "There'll be great presidents again, but there'll never be another Camelot." It was a reference to the show's music, which she insisted her husband adored. With the ideals of a generation suddenly vanquished, the myth of a contemporary Camelot became wedded to the legendary one.
And Jared Bowen is here. Well, I can't imagine them updating it. So is it vastly different from the 60s version?
No, it's exactly the same. And I think it was calling into mind that this anniversary was coming, the anniversary of President Kennedy's assassination. So this is what the world was experiencing, and this is what people embraced of the time. And I think it's sort of a timeless piece, actually. It was my first time seeing it. I was familiar with the music, but it's very traditional, and it's that sweet Lerner & Loewe music. So it's very engaging for that reason.
I'd like to bring Tom Whalen from Boston University also into the discussion. So Tom, as a kid, did you see the original?
I did, and this new version is okay, but it's funny because President Kennedy would have hated it. He hated over-romanticizing things. You know, he would prefer, I think his favorite song was Hooray for Hollywood by Ethel Merman, and he liked show tunes, in particular Sinatra. But, you know, he thought this was a little too tacky for his taste.
Well, I mean, one of the interesting things, though, is that I didn't realize that Jacqueline Kennedy had globbed onto this after the assassination, and this is how the whole myth of Camelot was built. But as Tom and I were just talking, too, there is an incredible darkness to this piece as well, because Guinevere is eventually caught with Lancelot, and she's almost burned at the stake. And so, basically, sort of a myth that Jackie Kennedy tied Kennedy to sort of surfaced later on when we realized sort of the failings he had as an individual, and later the questions about his administration and his presidency. So there is this sort of parallel universe to all of it.
And Camelot failed. Something you don't want is your presidential epitaph.
You're a historian. I mean, is that how it got going? I don't remember that. I thought that
there was an interview of Theodore White for Life magazine, and she mentioned that her husband was very fond of Camelot and the music, and it kind of caught on from there, took on a life of its own. And
you've been writing more about Kennedy, though, about his enemies.
Yes, and it's a very thick book, Emily.
Camelot, Like who?
Well, J. Edgar Hoover, for example, LBJ in his early days, Henry Cabot Lodge, his first major political opponent, George Wallace, and of course, how can you forget Lee Harvey Oswald, who ultimately ended his life.
I mean, was there some allegory there, too, do you think, in Camelot about the reason why they used it to describe that presidency?
Well, I think what Jackie Kennedy was really going for was these ideals. I mean, and it is very heartening, especially it's this time, and I don't know if it's overly romanticized. I wasn't there, but a lot of people talk about the innocence that this generation had. We heard former Mayor Ray Flynn the other night talking about the innocence lost, and that's exactly what you see in Camelot. You have King Arthur, who he has got such amazing utopian ideals and wants everything to be for good, and wants to get rid of battle and have his knights just build, not destroy. And so I think that there are so many reasons. I think that, and you can probably speak to this better than I can, but Jacqueline Kennedy, she knew immediately that she needed to build a legacy. She needed to preserve something. And because this was literally playing in the White House, so she says, he often listened to the LP, as a number of Americans did, because it was on the top of the charts for a number of weeks at that period. That was it.
Did she know that it would catch on like that?
She probably did. She had an incredible sense of culture and resonance, and I think she was probably one of the shrewdest first ladies we've ever had. But, you know, getting back to what Jared said, I mean, it's ironic, the president who got us involved in Vietnam, you know, he'd be identified with that musical score, which is really about failure, corruption, and destruction. And in a weird way, it's a very dark play, as Jared mentioned, that I think is really symptomatic of the 1960s to come.
So the current version, you feel, has done what to it?
I think it's pretty faithful to the standard, the original version. I didn't see any major changes, but I think we have changed as a people and as a culture looking back, that we look back kind of wistfully, but at the same time, you can see kind of the approaching storm clouds and the doom of Arthur we kind of feel, because in a way, that's what we feel happened to the country after the Kennedy assassination.
By the way, when this thing opened in Toronto, it was 4.5 hours long. That was 1960, I think, before, but I think they've trimmed it down a little bit.
Yeah, but that's how it was done. I mean, that's harkening back to the days of a tryout town.
Yeah.
Even when it came here, because it did try out in Boston before going to Broadway, it was still pretty bloated. And I think even after they started in New York, they took out a couple songs, which you'll find on the record. As far as this production at New Repertory Theatre, I thought, first of all, the singing is amazing. And I thought it was a very engaging piece in terms of how it's directed. And there's a lot to really appreciate. And it is, as Tom said, it's harkening back to a different time.
You know, also was thinking that back then, plays ran for years and years and years. This one had close to 1,000 performances. I don't know how many years it was total, but now they run for 3 weeks is not unusual.
That's true, and you know, back then you had Richard Burton in the lead and Julie Andrews. So I mean, that original production was great.
Well, it's all changing buying habits. I'm told that people buy last minute now, and so that's the reason they can't book shows months in advance, because they just don't know if the audiences are going to be there.
I'm going to book a ticket for Phantom of the Opera.
That one I'm excited to see.
I know. I'm a sucker for that one.
Are you sappy for that one?
Yes, I am sappy for that one. Jared Bowen, Tom Whalen, thanks so much.